Hello, good afternoon. Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome to you all, to those joining us online and to those of you here in the room as well. My name is Eno Ebong, and I serve as president of the Global Development Department here at CSIS. I've been at CSIS for about 8 months now, and I've been so impressed by the innovative and integrated approach that's taken to global development. This includes leading efforts in research, thought leadership, and convenings on key topics in infrastructure, which after all drives economic growth and development. So this afternoon, we are pleased to host you for a timely conversation on enhancing international cooperation for subsea cable systems, the fiber optic infrastructure underpinning global communications, and increasingly the AI-driven technologies for tomorrow. These cables face mounting challenges: contested maritime spaces, fragmented regulatory frameworks, limited coordination between public and private sectors, and a lack of clarity regarding cross-border cooperation during cable incidents. These constraints hamper the speed at which subsea cable disruptions can be mitigated and the effectiveness with which services can be restored. The consequences of disruption fall hardest on the Global South, where cable redundancy and therefore resilience is lacking. Clearly, greater international cooperation is imperative. And for several years, CSIS has been at the forefront of examining these issues. And tonight, we're so pleased to be able to continue that work with a distinguished group of speakers who will share their insights. I just want to take a moment to let you know what to expect this afternoon. I'll introduce our two keynote speakers before we shift to a panel discussion moderated by CSIS Senior Fellow Romina Bandura. Romina will open the floor to questions for the final sequence of the discussion, and we'll close our event with a reception just outside this room for those of you joining us in person. We at CSIS are really thrilled to host these formidable speakers, and we also appreciate the high caliber of our audience. Thank you all for joining us. With that, I'd now like to introduce our two keynote speakers. I'm delighted to welcome U.S. Representative Earl L. Buddy Carter, who has represented Georgia's 1st District since 2015 and has long been a leading voice in Congress on the importance of protecting America's critical technology and infrastructure. He has most recently sponsored the Undersea Cable Protection Act, which addresses some of the permitting and regulatory issues we hear about so often in this space. Following Congressman Carter, we are honored to host Minister Yasuyuki Okazaki, the head of the economic section at the Embassy of Japan. As a longtime career diplomat with Japan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he has an extensive experience in international economic policy, security affairs, and public diplomacy. Japan has an outsized role in this space and will be a key partner in the efforts to bolster international cooperation. We are so grateful to our keynote speakers and to all of our panelists for agreeing to share their time and expertise with us this afternoon. I know it will be an informative and enlightening conversation, and I now wish to call Congressman Carter to the floor. The podium is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you. Well, thank you very much for having me here today. I'm Buddy Carter, and I have the honor and the privilege of representing the 1st Congressional District of Georgia, which, for those of you who are familiar with our state, includes the entire coast of Georgia, over 100 miles of pristine coastline. It includes 2 major seaports, the Port of Savannah, the 3rd largest container port in the nation and the fastest growing in the nation, as well as the Port of Brunswick, the #1 roll-on, roll-off port in the country. And I mention that because it's important to what we're talking about today, and I'll talk about it a little later, because obviously representing the coast, and we're talking about undersea cables, it's appropriate that I would be involved in something like that. Very appropriate. But I do have the honor of representing the 1st District. I tell people all the time, 435 districts in the United States, and I get the honor and privilege of representing the very best one, and I truly believe it is. It's my home. It's where I've lived all my life, where I intend to live the rest of my life. It is very, very nice. We also have a strong military presence with Hunter Army Airfield, Fort Stewart, Kings Bay Naval Base, 2 Coast Guard stations. We also have a strong ag presence as well as a strong forestry presence. So obviously I'm very proud of my home area, my home district. But I want to tell you that I serve on the Energy and Commerce Committee. The Energy and Commerce Committee, as many of you know, is the oldest, most diverse committee in Congress, as we like to say. If it moves, it's energy. If it doesn't, then it's commerce. So we include everything. We have jurisdiction over just about everything that you can imagine. I serve on that committee for a number of different reasons, not the least of which is because professionally I'm a pharmacist. In fact, I used to be the only pharmacist in Congress. Now we have another pharmacist in Congress, so now I'm just the oldest pharmacist in Congress. But nevertheless, healthcare is also included in Energy and Commerce Committee, and it's something that we pay particularly attention to. I want to talk about undersea cables and how important they are. We all know that how important this is for a number of different reasons, for our financial markets, for our national security. But it's also important because it's a target. You know, I like to say that the first shot that will be fired in the next war will not be necessarily from a ship or from a tank, but will be something to do with cybersecurity or something to do with our infrastructure. That's where we have to build up our resiliency, and that's where we have to be very careful about the future, and we have to make sure that we're protecting that. No better example than undersea cables. When you think about the fact that 95% of all the financial transactions that are transacted in the world happen with undersea cables. Everybody thinks it's satellites, but it's not necessarily true. It is undersea cables. That's why it's so vitally important. And these cables are not just infrastructure. They're economic lifelines, as I said, national security assets, and again, now increasingly strategic targets. We all know that when a cable is cut, whether it be by accident or whether it be by design, the consequences are real and they're immediate. Economic disruption, degraded communications, and serious national security risk. All of those are a result of a cable being cut. We also know that we have to be aware of our adversaries, i.e. China. And we also know that China is investing heavily in this area, and that is one of the things that they're trying to compete with us against. The Chinese Communist Party spent years expanding its influence over global telecommunications infrastructure, including undersea cables. So we can't ignore this. We've got to make sure. We in the West know that whoever controls the infrastructure controls the flow of information, and that's ultimately power. This is not a hypothetical thing. It's happening right now. So if we fail to act, we're going to be in trouble, and we're going to lose, and we can't afford to lose. This is very important as AI becomes more prevalent in our society. And I will tell you that regardless of what committee you are talking about in Congress, the buzz at the Capitol right now is AI. Every committee, from financial services, natural resources, ag, doesn't matter. Every committee's having a hearing on AI and the impact that AI is going to have on that particular sector of our economy. So that's important to note as well. That's why I introduced H.R. 261, the Undersea Cable Protection Act of 2025. Because we got to address this. Quite simply, if undersea cables are critical infrastructure, we need to treat them like that. They are critical infrastructure, therefore they need to be treated that way. We need to strengthen coordination across the federal government. We need to make sure we're improving monitoring and threat awareness. We need to support faster repair and response capabilities and deepen our collaboration with our allies and the private sector. Both of those are important, our allies and the private sector. Yes, we need to make sure we're cooperating with the private sector and they're cooperating with us, sharing information, making sure that we are in coordination with them. Because the truth is that this is not just a challenge that government can solve alone. We need help in solving it. Duplicate and redundant permitting. You know, when we talk about permitting, I want to make sure you understand. I don't care what sector of our economy you're talking about, whether it be technology, whether it be power, whether it be energy, whether it be healthcare. When businesses come into my office, it's always the same thing. Permitting, regulations, crushing us. We got to do something about it. And that's one of the things that we have been focusing on in the Energy and Commerce Committee, making sure that we look at the permitting process and that we stream the permitting process. Now, as I mentioned before, I have the honor and privilege of representing the entire coast of Georgia. That is something I take very, very seriously. I love our environment. Some of my fondest memories growing up are going fishing with my dad. I want my children, my grandchildren to have that same opportunity. So I get very frustrated when I hear environmentalists say, oh, you don't care about our environment. No, nothing could be further from the truth. I do care about our environment, but we've got to be smart about this. Just because a permit takes 5 years doesn't mean it's better than a permit that takes 3 years. We can streamline the process. We can do a better job. We know that China's beating us in this area. And yes, they are not doing as good of a job as they need to be doing with protecting the environment. But at the same time, where is it written? Where is it said that the longer a process takes, the better the process is? That's not necessarily true. I don't subscribe to that, and I suspect you don't either. We can do a better job. We can streamline these things. And we've made some progress in Congress. We've passed some reforms that have really helped us. We've had NEPA reform. That was very important. We've had other reforms as well. The SPEED Act is another example of that, and we need to get that passed and signed into law. That's very important. But my bill, H.R. 261, really clarifies when a project has already been lawfully permitted and authorized that NOAA cannot require a second permit for the same activity. Duplicate. That's what we're trying to avoid, duplication. That's what this bill tries to do. The bill doesn't weaken environmental protections. All of the existing environmental laws, the reviews, and the interagency coordination requirements remain in place, fully in place. Projects still have to comply with the applicable safeguards, but it simply avoids repeating the same approval twice. I mentioned before that this has a tie to Georgia. It has a tie because we have undersea cables, yes, primarily on the Pacific coast, but we have them on the Atlantic coast as well. So yes, it does have a very important tie to the state of Georgia. It has an important tie to the economic engine of our district and of our state and of the Southeast, and that is the Georgia ports, what comes in and out of those ports. This is a very important part of that. Very important that we protect that. So that's what the legislation does, and that's what we're trying to achieve. What's next? What do we need to do next to make sure that we are getting this under control? Well, one thing we need to do is that we need to make it a national security priority. It is a national security priority. As I said before, the first shot that's going to be fired in the next war may not necessarily be from a ship or from a tank. It may be to the infrastructure, particularly that's going to disrupt our economy and our flow of information. Secondly, we need to invest in resiliency. We need to make sure we are resilient. We need to have redundant routes. We need to diversify pathways, and we need to have advanced monitoring systems. Thirdly, we've got to strengthen our partnerships, as I said before. We've got to strengthen our partnerships with our allies. We got to share our commitment to secure, transparent infrastructure, and we've got to push back on China. We got to push back against them because they are competing with us. This is the way that they think that they're going to win this war, and it is a war that we have to pay attention to. And finally, we need urgency. We do need to treat this with urgency. It is important. Look, one of the things that I wanted to address when I was talking about, when I was selling this bill and when I was advocating for it, on the Pacific coast in particular, have a lot of regions where a lot of areas where you can't have undersea cables. Now, look, I believe that we need to protect our environment, as I've said numerous times during this speech. But at the same time, as the Pacific coast, if we only limit the areas that we can have those undersea cables at, then we are essentially letting our adversaries know where they're at. We need to make sure. I don't want to disrupt anything in the environment, but we need to make sure that we are expanding as much as we can and that we're not being overprotective of our environment. So that's my story. I'm sticking with it. It's an honor to be with you here today, and it's an honor to carry this legislation. I'm very proud that we were able to get it passed out of the House, and I hope that they will pass it in the Senate. As we like to say in the House, the Senate's where all good bills go to die. I hope that's not the case with this. And yes, that is the reason why I'm running for the Senate in the state of Georgia now, is to do something about that. But it is important. It is very important. I think you understand that, and I think you get it. I think I'm with colleagues here who understand and who appreciate just how important this issue is. Thank you again for having me here today.
Mr. Okazaki, please join us.
Good afternoon. Well, it is sometimes difficult for the second keynote speaker, especially when we have the first excellent, brilliantly and comprehensively covered the all point I intended to speak in front of you. but I tried to my best, so please share your time with us. And thank you very much for Ms. Ebong for organizing this excellent seminars and on the very important topics. And I'm very grateful to have this opportunity to speak in front of the distinguished guests and the audience. Well, submarine cables are rarely visible in our daily lives, yet we highly rely on their network as an invisible backbone of the global digital economy, from online meeting to financial transaction, from government services and media activities to our diplomatic cables. Almost all international communications are supported by the silent infrastructure in the deep sea. This critical role means a single disruption can have far-reaching consequences across borders. In this sense, submarine cables are no longer merely technical hardware, but a strategic infrastructure of global importance. As an island country, Japan heavily depends on submarine cables for the vast majority of its international communications. Equally important, however, be Japan's geographical position. Japan sits along major routes connecting East Asia and North America, effectively serving as a key submarine cable hub. In this regard, the government of Japan believes it bears not only responsibility for its own communications, but also for resilience of connectivity across the Asian Pacific region and beyond. We therefore consider it essential for Japan to contribute to strengthening submarine cable resilience in the region, in close coordination with like-minded partners, including the United States. The most significant and immediate threat for cables is natural disaster. During the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011, acute seabed crustal movements of the Pacific coast of Tohoku areas damaged multiple submarine cables simultaneously and caused serious disruptions to international communications. Given that Japan is located in a region prone to earthquakes and tsunamis, for us, this risk is structural, persistent. In addition, incidents caused by human activities have been increasing worldwide in recent years. These include damage from the fishing activities, ship anchors, maritime accident, and offshore constructions. For now, we regard these incidents as accidental. However, amid rising geopolitical tensions in the region, concerns over intentional interference with such infrastructure are growing. Furthermore, cyber attacks targeting landing station facilities, particularly submarine line terminal equipment or SLTE, are increasingly recognized as a new category of threat. Under these circumstances, it is becoming even more critical to ensure that submarine cable deployment, maintenance, and repair should be carried out by trusted operators and suppliers. In response to these natural, man-made, and cyber risks, Japan is implementing a set of comprehensive measures. Roughly speaking, our approach consists of two pillars. The first is ensuring redundancy, simply increasing the number of submarine cables to the greatest extent possible can effectively mitigate the risks associated with cable damage. However, we cannot overlook the fact that the key bottleneck lies in the location of the landing stations. In Japan, major landing stations are currently concentrated in two areas, which naturally leads to a concentration of submarine cables in these areas. To address this, Japan is now working on geographically distributed network of landing stations. However, such diversification entails a significant cost of private operators, and market mechanism alone may not be sufficient to achieve it. A certain level of policy and financial support from the government is therefore necessary. In addition, enhancing redundancy requires an enabling regulatory environment for the rapid and cost-efficient deployment of such cables. In many countries, submarine cable installation and repair are subject to complex, multi-layered regulations across telecommunication, port management, and fishery industries. Japan has been developing a streamlined regulatory framework with regulatory clarity and predictability in order to facilitate faster deployment, and we will continue this effort. The second pillar of our approach be ensuring rapid restoration in the event of disruptions. A critical element here is the availability of repair and cable lining vessels. While Japan possesses a certain level of repair capacity, the Asian Pacific region as a whole is a major growing hub of submarine cables and faces continuous high demand for such capability. Thus, in the event of multiple simultaneous failures, there is a risk that repair capacity could be severely insufficient. More specifically speaking, global demands for cable-laying vessels has been significantly increasing in recent years, which raises concerns about potential dependency on inappropriate service providers. In light of this, the Japanese government submitted a bill to the National Diet of Japan last week to designate laying and maintenance of submarine cables as a critical service to economic security. Through this effort, the government aims to ensure conducive ecosystem to this industry, specifically by providing financial support for detention of cable-laying vessels. Furthermore, investment in such technologies as to enable rapid identification of damaged locations is also crucial. One promising example is distributing sensing technology using optical fiber as a sensors. This technology does not require any additional subsea equipment and can be introduced at relatively low cost. It is expected to be applicable not only submarine cable monitoring, but also to disaster prevention, such as early detection of tsunami and subsea earthquakes. The government of Japan is actively enhancing investment in such technologies. Last but not least, Japan places great importance on international cooperation. As I explained, the objectives are clear. First is enhancing redundancy, and second is strengthening the resilience of submarine cable networks. One possible approach could be to establish an early response mechanism among like-minded countries, including the United States, of course, in the event of damage to submarine cables. On that premises, it is highly essential to set up a swift and effective information sharing system among like-minded countries on cable monitoring data and damage detection information. Likewise, sharing information on regulatory frameworks to promote transparency and, where possible, align administrative procedures would contribute to smoother and effective operations. Furthermore, it is increasingly necessary for like-minded countries to promote international cooperation on research and development for advanced technology and financial technical support for the laying of submarine cables in developing countries. We believe that Japan and the United States can make significant contribution to the world in these areas. The stability of submarine cables underpins trust and connectivity across the region. As we deepen strategic partnership among like-minded countries, ensuring free, secure, resilient communications is indispensable. Submarine cables constitute one of the most critical foundations supporting these objectives. Therefore, I would like to reiterate that today we are going to discuss strategic international infrastructure that sustains prosperity and the stability of today's international community. Japan remains committed to playing an active and responsible role in strengthening the resilience of connectivity across the world. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, welcome to CSIS again. Thank you for attending this important event. My name is Romina Bandura. I'll be moderating the session. I'm a senior fellow at the Project on Prosperity and Development here at CSIS, so very excited to be sharing this discussion with such esteemed guests and speakers. So as it was already mentioned, we're discussing how to increase cooperation, not only amongst governments, but also amongst government to businesses. So, the sea has become a very important asset, not only just for subsea fiber optic cables. I would say it's a strategic asset also for other types of infrastructure. The Congressman mentioned ports. There's also shipbuilding. We have offshore infrastructure such as oil rigs. We have wind turbines. And we have subsea infrastructure. So a lot of people also confuse cables with power cables. We have power cables, we have pipelines, and we have subsea cables. I would say that in terms of the trends that are impacting this digital connectivity today, we're witnessing three important dynamics. We live in a more contested economic security landscape with China and Russia as greatest rivals to the West. The second, I would say, is the COVID pandemic has shown that digital connectivity is more important than ever, and we are rising consumers not only in the West, but we have rising consumers in regions such as Africa, the Middle East. There's this data that everybody quotes that Africa will have almost double its population by 2050. And so they will require also greater digital connectivity. I believe it's one of the continents that is, very sort of low in the ranking of access to digital connectivity. And I would say the third important dynamic that we're experiencing in this type of infrastructure is global technological competition, as both, the Congressman has spoken about AI, but, the minister also spoke about competition about this infrastructure. So we have the rise of AI, we have increasing needs for data centers, energy infrastructure, and also obviously demanding greater subsea cables built. So today we're going to try to unpack how to really meet this, increasing demand for redundancy. We also know that there's increasing demand for repair. I'm just going to quote a figure from a latest report by Telegeography and Infra Analytics, which we probably saw. They project an increase of 48% in net total cable kilometers by 2040. But they also predict that by 2040, 2/3 of cable maintenance ship will have to be replaced. They'll come to the end of their service life. And half of the global fleet vessel of cable ships that are laying cables also will approach this milestone. So yes, we'll need more cable laying vessels, more cable repair ships. And so how do we also increase cooperation in terms of increasing the redundancy and the repair? And so we're going to try to unpack in an hour all these issues. I have with me, very important speakers today. I'm going to briefly introduce them. To my left is Sarah McComb. She is Principal of Infrastructure Global Expansion at Amazon Web Services. Next to Sarah, we have Adam Chan. He's the Director of the Council on National Security at the Federal Communications Commission, FCC. Then next to Adam, we have Hubert Han. He's Digital Counselor from the Embassy of Singapore, and he gets extra points and drinks because he just landed from a very long trip to Singapore. And then next to Huber is Kent Bressy. He's the legal advisor of the International Cable Protection Committee, ICPC. And last but not least, Tatsuya Kurosaka. He's project associate professor at Keio University, and he's a visiting scholar here at Georgetown University. So before we dive into the topics of international cooperation, I just want to give each of you a chance to briefly mention, to introduce your organization. Obviously, they don't need introduction, but how does your organization and work fit with this topic of international cooperation? And I'll start with the lady to my left, Sarah. So please, just like 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay, sure. I'm assuming I don't have to introduce AWS to you all, so we're going to leave it there. But AWS, one of the reasons I'm up here is I'm up here representing essentially the cable owner side of the industry. So we rely upon these cables as literally the backbone of the internet, the backbone of our network. So AWS, we are a user of third-party systems. We are an investor and an owner of our own systems. And as the demands and the requirements of our customers increase, that increases our own requirements for the development of these systems as well. So these topics are very top of mind when we look across the globe for where we need to implement new infrastructure, where we need to make sure that we have as much redundancy and security as possible. A lot of that goes into examining what are the regulatories and the policies that we have to deal with, who are the players that are going to be involved to make sure that we are going to be able to serve our customers and their needs.
Adam?
Thanks so much for having me. So I'm Adam Chan, oversee the national security work at the FCC. For those who don't know, the FCC is the main regulator of undersea cables in the U.S. because any cable that lands in the U.S. and either travels internationally or connects, to Alaska, Hawaii, etc., needs to get licensed by the FCC, and so that allows us to impose certain regulations there. Combination of last year coupled with an upcoming rulemaking in the coming months, the FCC is really engaged in a revolution in how the U.S. regulates undersea cables. With a two-pronged goal of strengthening security requirements and then also accelerating the deployment and laying of cables to boost resilience and the sort of economic development, AI infrastructure that comes with that. So that means things like, preventing foreign adversaries from leasing capacity or owning and operating cables, cybersecurity and physical security requirements, preventing certain untrusted equipment and services in cables, incentivizing the use of trusted repair and maintenance ships, as an earlier speaker mentioned. So all of those things are on the security side. We are also looking in the coming months to really accelerate the permitting process, as Congressman Carter discussed. It's obviously a big barrier. Right now, it often takes months or years to actually get a license. We're hoping to shorten that to a very streamlined approach to basically have sort of presumption of grant for the quote-unquote good guys who can certify to a high security standard. And that way, rather than sort of these ongoing reviews, we can shift more and more cables to a sort of rule-based permitting, where it becomes much easier to get permits if you're willing to sign on to a high level of security. Last thing I'll say to the point about how we work with, working international cooperation with the private sector, I think we really see the first step towards any of that cooperation is security. And so security among the cables that are laid and that are going to be laid is a necessary prerequisite to strengthen cooperation either with private partners, because security enables us to trust our private partners to be able to actually work with them, as well as allied countries, partner countries, to adopt strong security measures for their cables that then allows us to work closely with them. So we've been working closely with our Japanese counterparts and others. Just yesterday, I was meeting with ambassadors from the Nordic and Baltic countries on this issue, because they've been on the front lines from some recent damage to cables, to try to work with them to harmonize their rules in their countries, in the EU and other allied countries, to increasingly harmonize regulations, which can hopefully streamline accelerated deployment and also allow us to work together with them once we all have a secure baseline.
Thank you, Adam. Hubert.
Hi. First of all, thank you to CSIS for having me here. I'm Hubert Han, Digital Counselor at the Singapore Embassy. I'm also Senior Tech Policy Advisor to Singapore's Ministry of Digital Development and Information, which is the parent ministry to the Infocom and Media Development Authority, or IMDA, which some of you might be more familiar with. IMDA is often cited as the one-stop shop for cable deployment in Singapore. I hope that's true. Certainly it is within government. They are the front-facing shop when it comes to anything to do with cables. At the ministry level, what our role is very much more in terms of setting the strategic direction and priorities for the cables ecosystem in Singapore. So a couple of years ago, some of you might have seen and this, I hope, is not too much government speak, but a digital connectivity blueprint that we put out. One of the important things within that was a commitment to double the capacity for subsea cable landings in Singapore over the next decade. Any of you who know Singapore knows that we are already a subsea cable hub within the region. And so the commitment to double the capacity for additional landings, we think, was and is an important signal of the government's commitment, despite land and resource constraints, to be committed to subsea cable growth in Singapore. So that's what we do at that level, to try to broker between the different agencies, to take into account performance, resilience, redundancy, all of the things which the previous speakers have spoken about. And happy to be here.
Wonderful. Please, Ken.
I'm Kent Bressie. I am the legal advisor for the International Cable Protection Committee, and I am also a partner in the law firm HWG based here in Washington, D.C. The ICPC is the world's leading non-governmental organization devoted to promoting cable protection and resilience, with more than 275 members from approximately 70 countries around the world. So a lot of the focus of our discussion here today is exactly what the ICPC does, working within the industry, with governments, with other marine industries and international organizations. And most notably, the ICPC has been promoting its best practices for governments for cable protection and resilience, which we released about 5 years ago and continue to update. And really drawing on a host of disciplines within the ICPC, whether it is operational, legal, technical, or also science-based, because we do a lot of work in relation to environmental regulation of cables. With my law practice, I'm principally representing submarine cable owners, investors, and suppliers across a whole range of things. So I've worked with a number of our other panelists here, whether in industry and developing particular projects. We've been very active, particularly for the North American Submarine Cable Association, which we represent. In the rulemaking that Adam was discussing, we're optimistic that we are going to get regulatory relief and a streamlined path forward. We're excited about those prospects. But I also spend a lot of my time working in both of those roles with other governments, in particular those represented here today, Singapore and Japan in particular, which have a keen interest in these issues. I was just at the International Seabed Authority because deep seabed mining is a big issue in terms of potential risks, something that the U.S. government, we believe the agencies NOAA and BOEM need to pay more attention to. It's not just with the International Seabed Authority, but also with environmental regulation. I'm heading to New York next week for implementation of the new BBNJ treaty. So it's a really dynamic, interesting area with a lot of opportunities, but a lot of risk, because as mentioned earlier, the oceans are really crowded places and strategic places. And so that poses lots of challenges.
Wonderful. And Tetsuya.
Hi, my name is Tetsuya Kurosaka. I am a visiting researcher of Georgetown University and also part-time professor of the Keio University in Japan as well. We don't need any introductions about Georgetown University in the DC, and working for the research of the policy regarding digital affairs and the AIs and the emerging technologies like 6Gs and the non-terrestrial networks, something like that. And in order to make harmonizations between the United States and Japan, for the international corporations for making the good alliance for and with the like-minded countries. And also the Keio University is one of the largest university in Japan which gathers several departments like science, economics, policy, or something like that. And also the we are thinking about this kind of the national security as well. So that's why we have several colleagues with the CSIS, and like Professor Tsuchiya or something like that. And also, I am working for the Japanese government as several committee members, like overall strategies and designing or the telecommunication policies. Not only the subsea cables, but also the non-terrestrials, the 6G, the coming technologies. So that's why that I'm standing at the mutual point. It's very complicated situation this time. And I would like to stress that the subsea cables is very much important this time, because all of you mentioned that subsea cables not only for the technical matters and not only for the economic matters, but also the national security as well. So, and this time it's very important for Japan. Everybody knows that we are in the critical situations around the Eastern Asian areas and the Asian Pacific regions. So that's why we would like to discuss how we achieve the good partnership about this kind of context. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So let's dive into some of the topics. I'm going to start with maybe repair first. And I know the minister talked about, he gave great ideas of how we can better cooperate. But I wanted to ask you all, how can we better plan, for maybe disruptions of subsea cables and better coordinate in terms of repair, repair response so that it's more immediate. And so I'm going to start with that meta question on repair and coordination. So maybe I'll turn to Kent, because you mentioned that you work on these issues all the time. So I'll give you the floor first.
Thank you so much, and thank you again for having me here today with a great group. So what approaches can be taken to ensure a more rapid response and better coordinate? I mean, certainly reducing regulatory impediments and permitting impediments. And it's not just with one government, it's working with other governments, because this infrastructure is regional and global in nature, and what your neighbors can do can affect your own connectivity greatly. And I would just note a couple of documents. I mentioned earlier ICPC's best practices, which are available on the ICPC website, about 12 pages long, with some of our best thinking about some of these issues. But also the call to action that we issued at the beginning of the pandemic, because there was this massive spike in demand for connectivity and use, which has not abated at all, but suddenly the world was paralyzed with lots of difficulty in building new infrastructure and conducting repairs, and trying to move crews and material around the world was incredibly complicated. And so we shared some of our thinking then as well about how to expedite things, and a lot of those lessons apply in non-pandemic circumstances. But I think there's some really practical things with repair in particular. Marine services, there's a lot of protectionism. That was one of the things that never moved forward with WTO liberalization. Not a popular topic these days, but we never had liberalization in marine services. And so we have a lot of restrictions that make it hard to do vessel-based activities, whether installation or repair. So removing cabotage restrictions to allow easier access for foreign flagged vessels and foreign crews. Establishing mechanisms for annual pre-clearance procedures for vessels and crews so that they don't have to stop and be vetted every time when they're doing something time sensitive. There is a way to plan in advance to try to get information about those activities and parties that doesn't hold up particularly a time-sensitive repair, limiting requirements for port visits. I mean, we're really down in the weeds here, but there are a lot of very practical things that governments can do. And also things with customs processes, inspections, duties, and taxes. Spare equipment is typically stored in depots around the world, and parties conducting repairs need quick access without a lot of additional charges to be able to conduct repairs. And there's a lot of distortion in terms of where spare material is stored, also intersecting with things like the Jones Act here in the United States with cabotage. So where's the big depot for repairs in the Atlantic? It's in Curacao, of all places. It's not in the United States, because the Jones Act makes it very, very difficult to try to store and access and transport spare material. So just some very practical things to consider. Also, just other kinds of permitting in advance. The Congressman talked a little bit about national marine sanctuaries, which I know is a hot button topic for many of us here in the industry. And authorizing repairs in advance. We have clients that now have a new sanctuary off the coast of California on top of existing cables, with proposed 10 pages of conditions that they have to comply with now, which would greatly interfere with the ability to conduct repairs efficiently. And one of the problems that has really resulted in that is that we don't have centralized coordination within the United States from a policy perspective, looking at these strategic issues with cables across agencies. NOAA goes and does what NOAA always does without regard for cables, and no one in the White House historically, regardless of administration, has really tried to take ownership of those issues. But we need that, in part to promote a stable regulatory environment. This is long-term fixed infrastructure on the seafloor. It can't easily be moved or redeployed elsewhere. And so there's a need to know what the rules of the road are going to be for the long term. One of the reasons we're happy with the prospect of FCC reform in this area. But it affects environmental permitting and what other countries neighboring the United States and in the region are doing. So it's a long list of things.
Wonderful. Others that want to maybe comment? Sarah?
I would echo everything that Kent has said there. The other thing I would sort of dive into with this topic is I think everybody's favorite part of this topic, which is the ships. So depending on who you talk to, there is sort of a widespread panic about, oh my God, the ships are all going to fall apart and we don't have enough of them. Or there is the other end of the spectrum of we are actually okay. I think the reality sits somewhere in the middle, more to the we are okay side of the thing. Industry has built this industry to be able to address these cable systems. It is a rather delicate balance that has been created. We are able to address the cuts and repairs that occur from normal cases of business. So let's say it's the 95%. 70% of faults occur from anchors and shipping, about 25% from natural hazards like earthquakes, underwater landslides, and that 5% category of the other, which you would put in sort of intentional human harm. But the vast majority of the time, we are able to address the risks. This is also why we build our networks to have multiple cable systems in them. So if you do suffer a fault, the traffic just reroutes. The more cables you have, the more secure, the more resilient you are. So while yes, you have to acknowledge the fact that the ships are in various ages, some of them are getting older, there are also new ships that are being developed and new ships that are coming online. So I think one of the things that sort of sitting here from a cable owner industry perspective that I would caution some governments who get really, really excited about ships is what we don't need is a flood of them entering into the market. They are incredibly expensive to build and to maintain. You basically need them out there working every day in order for it to pay for itself. Right. So if a flood of new vessels go into the market, that upsets that balance, and it creates probably bigger problems than we are prepared to deal with.
Thank you for that. Adam, do you want to comment?
Sure, yeah, I can comment maybe from the government perspective. I mean, I think we broadly share the view that we have enough ships for, the sort of current day-to-day maintenance and repair, although I will note we're often dependent on untrusted ships, which maybe, raises some concerns. I think our bigger concern is what happens in the event of a crisis, right? So, I mean, if we're in a war and numerous cables that are critical to wartime communication are disrupted at once, we do not have the capacity to rapidly repair all of those cables at once. And so that I think is very much what sort of most concerns us from the government perspective. Now, again, the solution to that is not necessarily just, have more ships for the day-to-day basis, but we do need much greater repair and maintenance capacity in those sort of just-in-case situations. And we're seeing this sort of more broadly from COVID to the sort of energy crisis in 2022, supply chain issues. We need sort of resilient supply chains that are not sort of sufficient for the sort of ordinary use case, but are sufficient in the event of mass disruption. And there, I just don't think there is the spare capacity in the repair and maintenance ship services that could respond in a crisis if and when we need it.
Mm-hmm. So let me just push you on this. So what would be like one solution is, because I heard, maybe an international coalition of partners, this costs money, so they'll have to put money to build some kind of, ship repairing capacity for those situations.
Yeah, no, I mean, a lot of it is sort of outside of the FCC's specific lane. I think certainly incentives to build more capacity. I think also like working with international partners such that all of our shipping is available in times of crisis to be used and directed by the government. I think all of those are important. I think where we have, proposed rules and are seeking comment now is on, potentially incentivizing the use of trusted shipping, which again sort of goes to this same point, are these ships going to be available in times of crisis or are they not? And that ultimately is the sort of crucial question.
Thank you, Adam. Hubert or Tetsuya, do you want to comment?
Yes. Totally agree with that opinions. I think it's very important for the government, especially for Japanese government, to establish a fund to invest to the private sector, because the situation will be the critical, and it will be beyond the capability for the private sector at this time. So now, in fact, the Japanese government now trying to raise the fund for the shipbuildings, and also they had to expand the capabilities for the not really lanes, but also the repair for the potential incident of the subsea cable cut. And also we try to have more ships. And now this time we, at Japan, we only have 5 ships. And every ship, all ships are under the operation every time. So we need to adapt a quick response when something occurs. So that's why we try to expand the capability all over Japan. And also that we would like to have a contribute with allied countries like United States and Singapore and things like that. So that's why every country, every government would like to build this kind of funds and also the capabilities. And also we need to make a connect for the reasonable operations to protect and to repair the subsea cable when we have the severe accident.
So like would a information sharing platform be something that would be useful or not? Is that one tool?
Yes, it's a very crucial point. Is that we need to have the real-time information and the strict management. It's very important because it is confidential information about operations and accident of the subsea cables. But we need to face on this kind of the latest situations to share this kind of information with the stakeholder, all of the stakeholders for the operations of the subsea cables. It's a very complicated situation. Today, we're gathering the private sectors, the regulators, the embassies, and also the authorities, and researchers as well. So we need to see the common understanding. So we need to see the common practices for the operations. So that's why the information sharing and this kind of the platform is very important.
I echo all of my panelists' points about best practices, capacity building, and whatnot. I want to maybe emphasize a bit in terms of the response processes in place. At the end of the day, every cable cut is to some extent unique. The assessment of each is unique in terms of the extent of damage, in terms of availability of redundancy at that point in time, in terms of the expected length of disruption. And all of these are critical to inform the response of any of us on the stage. It therefore is important that we all have a sense of what each of our, for lack of a better term, pain thresholds are. If it is something which is going to be fundamental, a cut which is going to be fundamental to the functioning of the economy, then a country is going to be a bit more concerned about that. If it's going to be availability of, say, data centers of a specific company, they are going to be concerned about that. The response structures and processes, I think, are equally important to the best practices. It's always, I mean, we can all agree that when a cable cut happens, yes, we want to fix it as soon as possible. But in terms of informing what we do about it, I think we all take into account the assessment of how bad that cable cut is at that point in time. We're not going to respond to every single cable cut the same. And so in terms of response processes and structures, at the national level, we have IMDA as a one-stop shop. That doesn't just mean ease of contact with the private sector. Actually, more importantly, within the government, it means that we have worked out each agency's mandate. When a cut happens, what's that workflow? What's your threshold in terms of informing, in terms of triggering something? And those things are important. Adam spoke very briefly about sort of an international platform or something like that. It would be not just bringing together those countries, but actually knowing what each of those countries can bring to the table and what each of our thresholds might be in order to inform the response. At the end of the day, each cable cut is unique.
Are there any changes to like the international, regulations or framework for undersea cables that need to be fixed or that are outdated or that would maybe help or no? Just a question. Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to say it's outdated. We would all hope for it to be more up to date. I would say, to that point, maybe let's not view it in terms of just having one governing structure. Right? Obviously, we would want to have as much as possible an international structure around which there is best practices that we can all agree on. Within that, still, even at the regional level, for us in Southeast Asia, we've moved forward on certain guidelines. They take into account certain regional domestic dynamics. And we have therefore emphasized some of these. Similarly, with like-minded partners, we had the New York Principles in 2024 that we hope to sustain the momentum on. So, necessarily to fix one platform, but to see whether there are various ways in which we can just make progress at various platforms. I think that's the way we view it.
Ken, do you want to say something?
Just note for those of you who are maybe less familiar, we don't have an intergovernmental organization that regulates submarine cables at the global level. That's not the role of the International Telecommunication Union, for example, unlike with satellites and allocating orbital slots and regulating the radio spectrum. So the legal regime is really dictated in large part by the Law of the Sea Convention, which the United States is not a party to, but it was the prime mover behind it and still observes as customary international law. And that framework, largely of freedoms, has really been helped to facilitate the deployment of this global infrastructure and proliferation. So while it certainly has defects, submarine cables are an activity that is specifically mentioned in 10 different articles in the Law of the Sea Convention. It's been the subject of intense interest and scholarly scrutiny. But it has been a flexible regime that I think has allowed for a lot of innovation. I was struck by some of Sarah's comments in talking about what industry is doing and what industry has created. It really has done so without centralized government direct. I mean, there was a period when a lot of the owner-operators were government-owned enterprises, but it has really been an industry-led activity, and even in crises, a lot of the responses, discussion by one of our keynote speakers about the Tohoku earthquake and looking at what industry did there, competitors coming together to coordinate ship schedules to try to arrange repairs, owners competing against each other, but also swapping restoration capacity with each other. And so I think there's a need to recognize that industry itself has a lot of great ideas and well-established mechanisms for doing these things, and governments need to be careful about stepping on those or interfering with them in a way that creates unforeseen consequences. That's not a reason not to plan for crises or disasters. There was a discussion at the Pacific Telecommunications Council meeting in January with two CEOs disagreeing. This might have been what Sarah was referring to about, do we have enough cable ships? And one saying, we absolutely do. We've got overcapacity. They don't have enough to do. And the other saying, yes, but you need sovereign capabilities, because what happens when you can't get a foreign flag vessel to do anything in your market? And so I think there's a need to account for those kinds of disaster scenarios while recognizing that this has been a great industry for taking care of a lot of complex problems.
I don't know if anybody else wants to. Okay.
Right, let me add my primitive thoughts that, yes, totally agree. There's a very difficult situations because we don't have any international bodies for the standardizations of the subsea cables. So that's why we can't make the consensus for the international understandings. So that's why I think we should find out our counterparts in the international cooperation in particular. I mean, we have various of the stakeholders for that kind of industries, and everybody very complicated. So, but we need to find the practical counterparts for the international corporations, like Japanese government, in the Japanese government and the Ministry of International Affairs and Communication take roles, and also in the states that the FCC taking roles as well. So they can meet and they can collaborate with each other. It's a very important point to make a bilateral communications and the contributions as well. And also we can update if we have an opportunity to discuss about the situation for the bilateral context. And I need to update this kind of the strict laws and also the very difficult to understand and difficult to make interpretations like UNCLOS or something like this. UNCLOS is one of the constitutions of the around the seas and including the Subsea situations, but very, very difficult to understand and very difficult to update to how we understand the practical situations for the accidents. So that's why at first we take the step for the making the bilaterals and also the multilaterals belonging to the allied countries as well.
If I could just add, sort of from industry's perspective, industry, we're the ones literally on the ground, or let's say we're on the sea. If you want input, we are here to give it. Because if you think about it, there's no one else out there that is literally going out and has as much experience with as many different world governments as cable owners, considering the fact of where we are putting these cables into place. We are not, like you've said, Kent, we're not dealing with a single international body. We are dealing with the governments at every level, and you're not just dealing with the government at its equivalent of a federal level, you're usually then dealing with multiple local levels as well. So from an industry perspective, we have built out our own sort of standards and our own capabilities to be able to have these discussions, sort of standardized talking points. One of the parties that AWS is involved with is the International Cable Coalition, Connectivity Coalition. I get my own group's name wrong, but the International Connectivity Coalition, and that's what we focus on primarily, is having these engagements with a variety of world governments to be able to give those recommendations from an industry perspective of, we understand that you all want us to be able to do this faster. This is how you do it. Streamline your permitting. Make sure that we can have trusted advocate programs, trusted applicant programs. There's various different ways that industry can be brought further into this discussion and into this process that can benefit overall. One of the things that we kind of have seen is there is a tendency to put a lot of these discussions in a black box under the name of national security. We get that there is real, vital national security concerns to be addressed. We also have the appropriate people within our organizations with the appropriate clearances to be able to have these discussions. So let us come to the table and let us have these discussions with you, because the information that we can impart can improve things overall.
Wonderful. Let me switch a little bit gears to, you mentioned you work with many governments, and, although here we don't have representation of developing countries, but, there's going to be, as I mentioned at the beginning, a huge demand for new cables in, Africa and elsewhere. But sometimes, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, this is, redundancy in developing countries is not commercially viable, or you might correct me. And governments don't have, they have fiscal constraints. We have, large indebtedness. And so how can, as a, the international community, and specifically I would say the, again, we don't have maybe the MDBs here, but the multilateral development banks and others, and development finance institutions, but how can we work better, and what strategies can we work on to really support, developing countries that need this digital infrastructure, and which costs a lot of money? So I'll give each one a turn to comment on that.
Well, you're right. These cables are incredibly expensive to build. It can, on average, a single cable, depending on its length and how complicated it is, you're talking about upwards of $1 billion in the cost of a system over its lifetime. So this is not a cheap endeavor that we go out on, which does make it incredibly difficult to justify to a certain extent putting those investments into certain places in the world where there isn't necessarily an existing infrastructure you're connecting to, at least from our standpoint. There's no data centers, that's driving it. I would say one of the key roles that those developing nations can play, and we have seen this, is in the diversity of routes. Part of what we do in order to ensure that we have a resilient network is making sure that we have diverse routes. We need to then develop more unique paths, and those, maybe they don't take the most direct route. They do go the long way around. So they do have the opportunity to be able to come closer to and connected to some of those countries. This sort of one of the best cases in point was there was cuts on systems off of the Ivory Coast. And because of the infrastructure that was in place, some parties were isolated, others weren't. When the issues occurred in the Red Sea and that area was shut down, there was other infrastructure to be able to go around Africa. So there are those opportunities, and I do believe that there are the organizations like the DFC and that can work with those smaller regional players to help with that funding and help them sort of jump on to other systems where as a cable owner, I'm going to need a local player to be that landing party, and then there's my excuse to be able to put in a short branch or something like that. So I would love to say that on the industry side that we can be entirely altruistic and go build the world's backbone, but that's just not the case. So there does need to be, somebody's got to have the money and the drive.
Yeah. And as we heard, Japan is also putting money, the government. So yeah, anybody else wants to comment on how do we increase, access to digital infrastructure in the Global South?
Well, can comment quickly. FCC is not the primary government agency, but we do coordinate very closely with the State Department, the Exim Bank, DFC, et cetera, to provide funding, especially for strategically critical cables in the developing world, most notably in the Indo-Pacific, especially Pacific Island countries where it may not make commercial sense to build more resilient cable infrastructure, but where it is strategically critical for any number of kind of obvious reasons. We've also been sort of coordinating with the Australians and New Zealand on this as well. But I think they're sort of looking where in the developing world is there not sufficient funding for industry to actually build out the cables, but that we really need the cable infrastructure to be built out for strategic purposes, and sort of focusing dollars there.
I think we're seeing, as Sarah had mentioned briefly, two different models. The industry itself, Google's Pacific projects are the best example, building segment by segment a massive mesh network on routes that a lot of people in the industry didn't expect to be built, and connecting some very remote islands in the Pacific as part of that mesh network. But even before that, we saw an enormous, and just using the Pacific as an example, an enormous amount of assistance from both the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, in addition to national funding initiatives to assist small island developing states in the Pacific to get their first cable connections. A lot of them are now working on their second and third connections. And so the world has changed considerably. My law practice worked on a lot of those projects and remember being stranded with very little connectivity, dial-up satellite, and then suddenly having the world open up. I mean, in some ways, it occasionally makes me sad. I'd like to be able to get away from the connectivity sometimes when I'm on holiday, let's be honest. But for these small island developing states, being able to participate in the global digital economy in that way is really important. And after not seeing much activity in Africa for decades, there's obviously just been an explosion of connectivity, both with regional and ring systems. And I think that that is going to continue. There's also just been this realization that route diversity can really play a huge role in making some of these countries attractive as pivot points for different segments. So some countries, it's never going to be economically sustainable to build a purpose-built system, but it may be possible to provide some funding if you have a long trunk and the owners are willing to talk with regional development banks and national players to add a segment. We've seen this twice in Palau. Was really pioneered in the Marshall Islands and in Micronesia. But I think we're going to continue to see that as a way to try to benefit and sort of catch a ride on a bigger system.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. My last topic will be tech for tech. How do we use new tech for this type of technology? We heard a lot about the minister talk about cyber sensing technology. I talked to some companies that are developing autonomous systems in the for the maritime space. So how can we use this new tech to protect cables, or maybe when we're laying new cables, is there any role that you see for new tech to protect this tech?
I think outside of just the technology perspective itself, that question almost goes back to the international cooperation standpoint, because I am not aware of any country at this point in time that wants a cable coming from a different country that has listening capability on it. A domestic cable within its own shores that has that capability, like educational systems, but great, fantastic, provides a huge amount of information. But a cable coming from the U.S. to somewhere in Asia, or the U.S. to somewhere in Europe, Europeans don't really want American tech on the Americans listening, and the Americans don't really want the Europeans listening. So I think that until there is more cohesiveness at the international level within the regulatory environment, from a cable owner perspective, it's not really feasible at this point in time.
Okay. Comments on that?
I'm sorry.
Tetsuya?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, now this time we can find the brand new buzzword named sensing, and then replacing AI. It's just kidding, but I saw the words ISAC. Do you know the ISAC? Integrated sensing and communications in the context of the spectrums and then the radio waves and something like that. And I saw those words in the Mobile World Congress Barcelona in the beginning of this month. And also I think the sensing is a very important use case, possible use case for the coming technologies and emerging technologies, not only subsea cables, but also the 6G networks and something like that. Also then combined to the AI, because the sensing is just a sensing, it's gathering the primary informations like the detections on the conditions on the atmospheres of these rooms, and when we use the AI to make an analysis for this kind of the data, we can make a reasoning how many people there's and then how many tempted there's and something like that. So, and the sensing is a very important technology. It's bad that they have possible problems you mentioned, like listening technologies or something like that. So that's why we need to make isolated from the kind of the technologies, and also the practical use, and only for the protections on the subsea cables as well. This is a difficult questions to how we isolate this kind of the technologies and the purpose of the technology as well. But the sensing is very important, because the sensing technology would be able to make a reasonable resolution to protect the subsea cable as well. So that's why we need to have an experimental trials for use of the subsea cables in the context of the kind of the sensing technologies as well.
Okay. Any other views on AI, sensing technologies, and others?
Maybe quickly, I fully agree that we should explore potential advancements. I must admit I don't know how much they would be helpful. At the end of the day, I think it's pretty clear that it's not going to be a silver bullet. The discussions that we have had in terms of the challenges facing the cable industry have not primarily been lack of information or lack of detection at this point in time. Actually, there's a whole host of other issues that we need to solve before we get to issues like sensing. I'm not saying they're mutually exclusive, but certainly we shouldn't just think of that as the one thing that we ought to be pursuing. The other thing I would add is if we are talking about sort of cyber sensing capabilities, assuming that adversaries currently have some of these capabilities within their systems, it can get into a sort of cat and mouse game. Improve your capabilities and vice versa, and all of that. So I just want to sort of put a note of caution that yes, we should obviously invest in this, but it's not going to be solving, I think, a lot of the bread and butter issues that we face today.
Yes.
Just briefly, one comment about sensing and then other technologies, because there are a lot of other exciting things going on relating to cable protection and resilience. But with sensing, there is a big divergence of views even within the industry, and a lot of complexity with technology, operations, and legal treatment, not just security issues, but that kind of data gathering a lot of countries treat as marine scientific research that is subject to a completely different legal regime under the Law of the Sea Convention. If you're interested in these issues, the ICPC just published a white paper last month that lays out all of them and makes a plea to governments saying this is a really interesting set of technologies that could be used for cable protection. Don't kill it by over-regulating it right now. There is a lot that needs to be done still with supply chains and figuring out ways to have supply of those services, even not the equipment. It might still be owned by the technology provider to provide a limited subset of the data for cable protection purposes only. There's a lot that can be done. But other technologies, we're seeing interesting deployments of drones, not just in connection with route development, but also monitoring of cables. And the discussion about AI has also led others not to think about just demand for cables, but also how can we analyze the risk environment that we have and gather intelligence to understand and plan better to try to design better protected systems and mitigate risks for those systems that are already in place. And I think we're going to see a lot more activity focused on that. What can we do in terms of learning before we get to the cable cut?
Wonderful. So we have a few more minutes left, and I want to invite our audience to maybe pose a question or ask or say something, about these issues, a comment. You are all very knowledgeable people. I know that a lot of you work in these issues, so please don't be shy. We have mics in the back, so raise your hand and please introduce yourself. So, any takers? Oh my goodness, it's a shy crowd. Anyone?
We've been so informative. They want. They need to know nothing more.
Well, then I will maybe ask each one of you just to give some closing thoughts, and yeah. So I'll start with you, Sarah, and then continue.
Yeah, I think that we're seeing a lot of the world's governments kind of get excited and wake up to the idea that subsea cables exist, which is great, concerning sometimes if we don't want them to go off the deep end. But I would sort of sitting here as an industry representation, sort of repeat my plea of utilize us, work with us. We have a lot of ideas on how things can be improved in maintaining the security standards and that everyone is concerned about, because we're concerned about that too, because we do this for our customers, many of whom are these same governments. So we want to make sure that we are building incredibly robust, secure networks, and that is done basically, rule number one, the more cables you have, the more secure you have, the more secure you are. So make life a little bit easier on us, please.
Okay, wonderful. Adam?
Yeah, but just, sort of keep it short. I think we're very eager to work both with, sort of private sector companies on how we can build more cables, as well as international, foreign governments on how we can sort of harmonize rules, cooperate, times of crisis, et cetera. So.
For Singapore, I think helping us to establish on-the-ground clarity, it's relatively easier to have clarity in terms of regulatory frameworks or in terms of best practices, but actually how that translates into what happens on the ground, and this is where we work. We hope we work very well and closely with a lot of private sector companies. We want to keep that going because that's the only way that, in terms of information sharing, threat sharing, and all of that, we actually know what's going on. So not just in terms of the frameworks, but actually what's happening on the ground or in the sea, I guess, is incredibly important for us.
It's critical that governments talk with each other, with other international organizations, and with all marine industries, not just the submarine cable industry, about the dynamic ocean environment. And certainly there's work to be done by governments and industry speaking with their friends and allied countries and like-minded countries, but that's not the extent of the global network. It connects everywhere. And we see as an industry that we have to deal with environments with very different risk profiles. And it's important to be able to account for that as well, because we're still communicating with people and transacting with people in those parts of the world.
Right.
And so I think of it really as separate work streams, but it can't just be talking among Five Eyes governments or allied governments. They've got work to do, certainly, in promoting the rule of law for the oceans and these networks. But there are a lot of other cable protection challenges that we have.
All right, thank you very much. And today we had great discussions, very much impressive discussions about redundancy and resiliency as well. And this concept is very important, and so we need to shape up this kind of the concept and clarify what is redundancy, what is the goals of the resiliencies this time. And my opinion is that we can learn the experiences from the emerging stage of the deployment of internet, probably 20 years, 30 years ago. In Japan, and helped we help the development, developing APAC region, APAC countries to deploy the internet infrastructures. Around 2000, and also probably when I was student, university student, because the Keio University took the leadership those kind of the situations, and also at that time we did introduce not only the subsea cables, not only the internet infrastructure, but alternatives like satellite communications and non-straight communication as well. Because the alternative is very important for the resiliencies. And today, every country, every people, depending on the internet connectivities, not only the YouTubes, but also the kind of the banking, the logistics, and the defense, and so on. And so that's why we need to protect the subsea cable itself, and also we have the alternative when we have an emergency situations. This is not the satellite communications not taken over and not replacing the subsea cables, but it's vital communication lines for the vital ordinary lives like banking or something like that. So we need to think about more about redundancy and resiliency as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So in closing, I want to thank all the speakers. And I'm going to steal like a line from the airline industry. You know, like when you land, some airlines, they say, I know you have a choice of, you know, think tank events to attend here in Washington, D.C., so we really value you coming here to CSIS today, and please join me in a round of applause for our excellent speakers. And we have a nice reception here in the second floor, so please join us, and we'll have some drinks and food. Thank you.
Thank you.